Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you guys. Going to talk about Vesta, the goddess Vesta, also known as Hestia. Vesta is the Roman name, Hestia is the Greek name. I'm just laughing because I've just spent about half an hour having to resolve an issue with my microphone sound, etc. Mercury has gone retrograde, right? Just a couple of days ago in Pisces. So, it's already begun the chaos of technological gadgets and communication and so forth. There's no reason why my microphone should have stopped working, right? There's no logical reason. But when Mercury goes retrograde, these are the sorts of things that do happen. Fortunately, I checked it because sometimes I don't do a test, and I could have just been sitting here talking now without you guys being able to hear me. Fortunately, the gods blessed me to alert me to check it. Anyway, it's just taken virtually 40 minutes of my time, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So, a few things that I want to help you guys understand relative to unpacking this beautiful, mystical, divine goddess that is extremely complex and has a very hidden dimension to her. And there's not a lot of material even available on her in terms of academia, mythology, astrology, and so forth. And there's very good symbolism relative to that, why she's so sort of I like to use the word mystical because she has a depth to her that really takes us into the domain of soul life. That's in a nutshell. That's fundamentally what she reflects from the point of view of how we activate her energy. What is the purpose of activating her energy, working with her, and why are certain people interested in working with her energy and why others are not. Vesta is a goddess that, in my understanding and in my opinion, is really an asteroid goddess that correlates to more soul-centered astrology or esoteric astrology, as opposed to personality, exoteric astrology. Okay, and that's another reason why she is not spoken about so much, particularly in popular astrology, because she belongs to the world of the soul, the inner dimensions. And in order to activate and access her energy, we must actually go into those realms. Now, her name Hestia, which derives, which connects to the Greek part of her, because she has history and mythology both in the Roman mythological stories and in Greek mythology as well. Hestia, who was known as the goddess of the hearth, Hearth. The word hearth actually means focus. It's from the Latin word meaning focus. So much of this archetype correlates to what we put our 100% focus into. And that's a very important point and a very important key word, because the moment we focus very intensely with devotion towards a particular thing or subject or person, then it is to the exclusion of other things. That's what focusing on one thing means. It's excluding everything else. That's why she's the principle. She correlates to the principle of focus and devotion. The root meaning of Hestia in terms of Sanskrit language actually means the shining one, or shining, to shine, which is totally apt for what she reflects, because she reflects the sacred flame. And in Greek mythology, in the Hellenistic period, the figure, the archetype that she was, what she represented, was found in every person's home. There was the concept and the devotional rituals and practices correlating to the flame, the sacred flame, was present in just every single person's home. So that flame in people's homes, whether it was, you know, through a fireplace, candles, whatever it was, that was in honor of Vesta or Hestia. She's a very deep, mystical, complex goddess who correlates to the priestess energy or archetype, if you like. She's the sacred sexual. She correlates to the sacred sexual religious devotions and practices. She's known as being part of the Vestal Virgins. And just be very clear about this, the Vestal Virgins were not virgins as we would interpret the word virgin, and neither actually was Vesta herself a virgin. The concept of virginity within her story is actually aligned with the way of life or living before the whole concept of marriage, Libra, came into existence through the patriarchal systems. So her story and her energy really predates the whole patriarchal way of living. She was totally autonomous and free and expressed her sexual energy for the purposes of healing and transformative work. Her sexual energy was used not for her own sexual pleasure, which is where the whole matter of sacrifice can come in. It was used actually to heal other people. So she connects to autonomy, transforming creative energies into purifying and integrating personal circuitry energy, electrical energy. Now, this is very interesting because when we go into certain parts of her myth and her story, I'd just like to read you something which is relative to what I just said about the sexual circuitry energies. Let me just adjust this slide. It seems to be going a little bit funny. Okay, let's keep it there. There's so many things that one needs to put into place in order for this video to even reach you guys. Anyway, that's another story. So Vesta governs the sexual fires known as the Kundalini energy. The Kundalini force that resides, which basically resides in the etheric body. Okay, we have many different bodies, and the etheric body is one of those. And the energy, the electrical energy that correlates to Vesta belonging or connecting to the etheric body resides at the base of the spine, hence why her energy correlates to Kundalini energy, because it is said that's where the Kundalini energy resides within all of us. And when it's awakened, then enormous spiritual illumination can come into the consciousness. And that's where it is born. That's where it is. That's where the spark comes through into our consciousness through that part of the body, as it were. So when this force is awakened and consciously channeled to higher centers, one gains an increased psychic awareness, ecstatic bliss, and eventual illumination known as adeptship. The psychic circuits running through the etheric body travel along the same circuits as the sexual currents. So she's a goddess that correlates to sexual energy, but not from the level of sexual pleasure, which is Venus. Some of the other important correlations to her, because she correlates to the sexual energy, which, by the way, when Vesta is acting in an imbalanced way within us, within our psychic structure, for whatever reason that may be, pertaining to this life, past lives, aspects in the birth chart, etc., then her energy can play out in very extreme ways. For example, Vesta is the asteroid that correlates to prostitutes, the work of prostitution. It is the energy that correlates to being promiscuous, in your life. You don't have to be a prostitute. You can just be a promiscuous type of individual. So she goes to those extremes. When her energy is imbalanced, it can be being extremely promiscuous, or it can be being totally sexually oppressed and suppressed. So the sexual energy becomes distorted or acts in a dysfunctional manner when her energy within the individual is not balanced out correctly. And that comes through, as I said, that would be seen through a particular person's birth chart relative to the position of Vesta in the chart and the aspects she has with certain planets, namely conjunctions and oppositions. There are exceptions, and I will go into those shortly when I start talking about aspects and so forth. So Vesta, from the point of view of sexual energy, it's the sublimation of sexual energy that, from the point of view of yogic practices, correlates to bhakti yoga, which is devotional yoga, hatha yoga, which is the physical, gnana yoga, which is intellectual, raja yoga, which is mental, and karma yoga, which is our work, our sacred work. So it's the sublimation of sexual energy into those streams, into those fields, the conscious practice towards those sorts of ancient practices, right? From the point of view of the principle of virginity, as I said, the whole thing about virginity relative to the Vestal virgins and Vesta, it's not the way we would normally understand the meaning of virginity. The meaning of virginity in the context of her story and the archetype that she reflects is about being unmarried, self-contained, self-reliant, personal integration, centeredness, focus, purification, inner strength, self-discipline, and voluntary simplicity. So she consciously chooses to remain unattached to anything or anybody. She's free. Very similar to Lilith when you think about it, right? There's an incredible sense of autonomy about this particular goddess and her undeniable focus of the use of sexual energy in order to actually illuminate her own consciousness, in order to come closer to the purification or the purity channel of working with divine energy. So she sacrifices herself, her energy, the sexual energy, in order to advance herself psychically and spiritually. That's what the whole purpose of her energy is. So it's the principle of focused sexual energy as it can be used in numerous ways relative to, from the spiritual perspective, which is really what she correlates to. It's the soul work, right? It's the soul work that we consciously choose to integrate into our path of evolution. So when she is highly emphasized in your chart, it would be no surprise that spiritual soul life is so fundamental to your becoming and to your evolutionary path. So the word devotion is also an incredibly powerful word to describe this archetype, Vesta. Devotion and the focusing principle. And the focusing principle, as I said before, it's so powerful because it's to the exclusion of everything else. And that's where some of the sacrifice can come in as well. Sexual energy, sexual issues, sexual repression, suppression, and denial, the sexual pathology of Vesta is incredibly deep and complex. She's astronomically, she's one of the brightest asteroids out of all the asteroids. And she's the only one that can be seen with the naked eye. And this is really beautiful because, going back to the point I made earlier, the Sanskrit root meaning to Hestia or Vesta is shining. And here we have, from an astronomical perspective, her body is the one body out of the asteroids that she shines the brightest, so we can actually see her with the naked eye. These things are not coincidental. It's not by chance that, the Sanskrit meaning means shining, and that in terms of what we can see with the naked eye, she's the brightest asteroid and so forth. These are not coincidences. They're beautiful synchronicities, actually, is what they are. Okay, so when you have also, just actually before I go there, the associated rulerships given to her. Now, the word associated rulerships is specifically used because we're not saying that these are the two signs that are the absolute rulership to Vesta, but they are the two signs that seem to describe and correlate to her frequency and her vibration. And the two signs are Virgo and Scorpio. And that within itself has a whole explanation and story to it. But it is fascinating because, as I've said previously in other videos, Scorpio and Virgo, they are the two most complex signs of the zodiac. And here we have a goddess, an asteroid goddess, who is actually considered to be one of the most complex goddess out of all the goddesses, and she is. And the associated rulership are two of the most complex signs of the zodiac that are given to her, Scorpio and Virgo. Sexual energy, Scorpio, and the purification of sexual energy, Virgo, just to put it very simply, just to throw some, strong keywords, obviously. So a person who has a very strong Vesta is a person who would be different, obviously, for each individual. But if it's working from a spiritual level, if a person is working consciously from that spiritual level and really developing the soul life, which is what Vesta is really about, then the focus and the dedication and the sacrifice is all channeled into the person's spiritual life and whatever that means or looks like, because it is different for all of us. That devotion, however, and that focus can also be seen on an external level as well. Because, for example, somebody might have Vesta in their sixth house in their natal birth chart, which would correlate to that part of their life, which is about work and service, self-improvement, and health. So in those areas, therefore, you would see Vesta playing out from the point of view of the person is really, really dedicated towards their what they have to offer from the level of service, right? And their own dedication to their own path of self-improvement, because that's what the sixth house is. It's really all about how do we improve ourselves in our journey as we are evolving and becoming on a day-to-day basis. And if she's found in the 10th house, then again, you would likely see her operating on that external level. And it might just be, just to use a basic example, outside of the soul work, which is where her primary intention resides. But if she was in the 10th house, and not just there alone, you really want to see her with another planet, and more specifically a personal planet, or opposite another planet, and or opposite a personal planet. The conjunction and opposition are said to be the main aspects that one really should consider when it comes to working with the asteroids. But there are exceptions, and as I said, I'll go into them shortly. So if she's found in the 10th house, then you could see perhaps an individual who's got a very prominent career path, right? Career life. And their whole life and their whole focus and their whole dedication is in their career at the exclusion of everything else. So that might be a person who, you know, doesn't get married, doesn't have kids, and is just really focused on their professional life, on their professional development and so forth. That's just an example from an external level. Then, of course, you need to start to bring in order to get the complete understanding of what Vesta means for you. And if indeed she's a prominent force in your chart, then it's about understanding, well, what sign is she in? Of course, what house is she in? And of course, is she conjunct or opposite any planets in your birth chart? And, you know, if she's conjunct the South Node, then clearly that's a very powerful past life story that you've had there with Vesta. If she's conjunct your North Node, then she's very important in the assimilation of the North Node journey in this lifetime for you, right? A very, very, very amazing and interesting point to understand about Vesta in terms of why there's this sense about her that's so hidden, right? Because she correlates to the inner dimensions, the soul life. It's where we do the work on that inner, deep, sacred level relative to our soul. It's what your soul is yearning for, what it's thirsty for, what it desires on those very deep levels. In terms of mythology, Vesta was one of the children of Saturn. So Saturn was her father. And if you know anything about Saturn's mythology, Saturn actually swallowed all his children, except for Jupiter. And in terms of the order of birth, Vesta was actually the first one to be born. So she was the first one to come out. And then when Saturn swallowed all his children, that's a whole other myth that I'm not going to go into now. But when he swallowed all his children, Vesta was the last one out of all the children, and there was a lot of them, to be reborn and to come back out again. In other words, she spent the longest time in his stomach, but the meaning to that is that she spent the longest time in the internal, inner spaces, existences. And that's another reason why she holds this frequency about her that's very hidden. It's connected to the occult, to the esoteric teachings, to soul-centered astrology, and the understanding and connection to soul life and what that means. Okay. Now, as I said, because she's a goddess that correlates to sexual energy, in a person's birth chart, I'll just give you a basic example. In a guy's chart, right, a man who is really in touch with this particular goddess in a healthy way, that would be the man that would really go out of his way in terms of really understanding the needs of a woman, and particularly the sexual needs. It's a guy who really understands the feminine frequency and you know what that entails, and the needs of a woman, right? Just to keep it very simple. If it's prominent in a woman's chart in a oppressed way, then it can be a woman who is very awkward and uncomfortable about her own sexual energy. And there can be a lot of shame and guilt associated with the archetype of Vesta from the point of view of sexual energy, right? Very similar to the goddess Lilith, where there's been a lot of shame and guilt put onto that particular archetype as well. Well, Vesta holds a similar type of experience, if you like, or pathology when she's distorted and operating in a dysfunctional way because her energy is being suppressed or oppressed or denied, right? Which is fundamentally what would come through the patriarchal system of model of understanding life in terms of, marriage, partnership, and so forth. As I said, if you go back into her mythology, she predates the whole Libran thing, which is marriage. And she belonged to a world where her sexual energy was given, including in sexual acts, for the purposes of healing. Think about that, right? Because if what that would look like today and how that would be judged, would be, it's such a taboo thing, right? That would be a woman who's just totally free and wild within herself and has no issue whatsoever using her sexual energy in a number of different ways, having multiple partners, for example, but not from the level of sexual pleasure, just for her own sexual sort of pleasure and gratification. That's Venus, right? But it would be the woman that uses sexual energy for the purposes of healing other people. I mean, there's pockets in history when you go way, way, way back, like over 6,000 years ago, where women, it's known that women would engage in lots of sexual activity with the men in their communities. And this is pre-Libran stuff, right? Pre-marriage. So the women would use the feminine sexual energy to actually heal the masculine and to tame the aggression, particularly where men experienced battle, and trauma and things, circumstances and conditions that required them to go out for battle where there was death and, pretty intense, heavy things going on. The women would use their energy in such a way because the feminine frequency has an incredible softness to it. That's the nature of the feminine. There's a softness to it. And the masculine has a more hard edge. That's the nature of the masculine. But it is such that feminine nature can be used to heal and calm and tame a lot of things. You can even think about that in very basic, mundane terms. There could be two people having a really intense, aggressive, violent argument. And there's a possibility that a third person could walk into the room, a female, and the very presence of that feminine energy and the approach, the softness that the feminine can bring in, can very quickly diffuse a situation that can potentially become disastrous. That's just a basic example. So there's something about this feminine frequency that has the ability to use the energy because of the softness that it inherently holds in order to create peace or just diffuse difficult situations, or to create healing and nurturing, right? That's what the Divine Mother does. She acts as a nurturing principle. Mother Earth. You know, you think about this earth plane, she nourishes herself and she nourishes us. She feeds us. If Mother Earth could not nourish and replenish herself, we too would die. So we need the nourishment, nurturing of this feminine frequency on so many different levels. And first and foremost, from our Mother Earth. This is how powerful the feminine is, obviously. So when you're looking at Vesta, as I said, look at where she is in your birth chart via the sign placement and the house placement. The sign shows you something about the style, you could say, of your approach towards devotion. Whatever it is you and I'm talking like, you know, deep devotion. I'm not talking about a hobby, fifth house. I'm talking about a devotion that comes from the depths of your soul. That's what she is close to, and that's what she activates. So, example, you know, people who go on, you know, some kind of spiritual retreat, or people, monks, you know, who live a celibate life, or people who choose to live a celibate life, or you know, choose to remain celibate for a month or 3 months, you know, for the purposes of their devotional spiritual practices. That's Vesta. That's Vesta being activated and channeled and worked with. It's the sublimation of sexual energy in ways that enhance spiritual illumination and growth and development. So look at what sign she's in. That will give you a sense of the style, approach towards your own interest and desire for deep soul work. The house location will describe to you the area of life where you would apply that level of devotion. The house is always the location, the area. The sign is the style. The aspects that are really important are the conjunctions and the oppositions. And it has to be a pretty tight orb as well. There are exceptions sometimes. The exceptions come through basically analysing an entire chart as opposed to just analysing one thing or two things. And that is what essentially one needs to develop and master in their own way if they are working with astrology. It's the ability and the artistry of the synthesis of the entire chart and how that reflects the soul's life, the person's life. It's not just I have Mars in the 10th house in Capricorn. Well, you know, there's millions of people that have that. That, you know, that's that. But to really understand anything in your chart, you first of all have to understand the basics, obviously, the 12 archetypes, the planetary and asteroid bodies, and the aspects. That's your core base to begin to understand astrology, just to begin to understand. And then the mastery or artistry of synthesis, which takes a long time to get to. But hey, you know, it's just a work in progress, right? So if Vesta is conjunct the nodes, she's highly significant, in my opinion. If she's conjunct or opposite a particular planet, namely a personal planet, she's got a strong voice in your chart. She could be in an aspect pattern, a particular configuration that would bring her prominence in very strong as well. So she could be in like one of your grand trines. She could be configuring in a yod formation aspect pattern that you have in your chart. She could be in a T-square. So it's important to know all those things. And so if she's in a grand trine, you see, now this is trines I'm talking about. So we're not talking about a conjunction or opposition here. A trine is a 90-degree angle, right? So it's, well, I'll show you in a minute in a chart, because I'm actually going to bring up Princess chart as an example. Love working with Princess chart, and coincidentally and fortunately he has a very prominent Vesta in his chart. So I'm really excited to just show you guys that. And in fact, I'll do that now. So why has it gone there? Okay, let me just, oh, sorry, I just pressed the wrong key. Okay, so that's a motorbike, right? Now there's people that are new to my channel or who are not aware that growling sound, which, well, a couple of people have said it sounds like a growling sound. What is that? It's a motorbike that's literally driving past my apartment. And as I've said many times, I live on a busy road. So if you hear that weird sound, that's all that is. Don't worry about it. It lasts, less than a second. Okay, so this is Prince's chart, Prince the singer, okay, born 7th of June 1958. This is his rectified time, 6:08 p.m. Look at his 8th house. There's his sun in Gemini, and there's Vesta in Gemini. That's a conjunction, without question. Interesting, he has Vulcan there as well, and Vulcan is conjunct Vesta as well. And Vulcan is also a very similar force to Vesta in terms of focus and dedication, right? It's the alchemical work that we do within, but from that masculine level, you could say. She's the feminine level. By the way, if you have Vesta at the midpoint of your ascendant and midheaven, she's likely to be a very important voice in your life story. In addition to that, now that I've mentioned midpoints, if she's not conjunct or opposite one of your personal planets or an outer planet, the outer planet is going to be a lot more difficult to understand what she really means for you. It doesn't mean you can't, but it's going to take a lot of digging, because the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, transpersonal energies that are out of our everyday conscious way of being. It's transcendental. When she's conjunct or opposite one of your personal planets, however, she's integrated and embodied within you on a very personal, every day-to-day level. Now, I have her conjunct my Mars in the 12th house in Capricorn. She's also in a grand trine. She's also in a kite formation pattern that I have. She's tied into a lot in my chart. And coincidentally, which it's not coincidence, I should say incidentally perhaps, or synchronistically, even better, this moment right now where I'm sitting down doing this video talking about Vesta, transiting Saturn, which is at 27 degrees of Capricorn today, is exactly conjunct my Vesta in the 12th house. And honestly, the last few days, I've just been so in resonance with her frequency. The Saturn transiting Saturn on her right now has it's activated something within me personally, which has given me a really powerful desire, motivation, and passion to give this information to you guys as well. And that's, that's not a coincidence. Okay, back to Prince's chart. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention about Vesta. Vesta is the goddess that connects to sisters. So if she's prominently placed in your chart, meaning conjunct or opposite a personal planet, configuring perhaps in a very important planetary aspect configuration, or on the nodes, conjunct either the north or the south node, or in a position of a very powerful midpoint. Say, for example, Vesta was the midpoint of the sun and the moon in your chart, or Venus and Mars. I would pay very close attention to that. And as I said, she correlates to sisters. So when you see her on the south node, I've seen this before. I've done readings for people. There's some very big story about the person and the sister that they have in their life this lifetime. And it's a past life story, and it's an unresolved story that requires work this lifetime. And sometimes, oddly enough, but I've seen this a couple of times through the years, the person who has an emphasized Vesta in their chart, say, if you want to talk about past lives, because my Vesta is in the 12th house, so she's got a big past life story in my life, and I know what it is, and I know the family member that it correlates to, and so on and so forth. So in the 12th house, then she's going to bring up some possible significant past life situation, possibly with your sister in this life, number one. Number two, it could even be your mother. It could be that your mother this lifetime was your sister in a previous lifetime. There can be scenarios like that. Believe me, I'm living it. So check midpoints, Sun, Moon midpoint, Mars, Venus midpoint. She could be on another midpoint. She could be, I'm in the process of doing a reading for a person at the moment who, if you can imagine this, she has Vesta right on the 5th house cusp. She has the south node right on the 5th house cusp, and then Chiron is just before the 5th house cusp. So what that means is that Vesta in this person's chart sits at the midpoint of Chiron and south node. That's a very, very important Vesta in this person's life. If it doesn't bring up a story for you relative to a family member such as a sister or even your mother, then its focus and intention is purely aligned with your own path relative to the soul work that you are assimilating towards, integrating, developing, growing, learning, experiencing. Okay, and I'll just finish up here. Sun conjunct Vesta in Gemini. Now, Vesta correlates to sisters. Gemini correlates to siblings. There's two levels that this is played out in Prince's chart. The most beautiful and most, it's literally in both situations, but one is a bit dark and one is it's just beautiful in terms of artistry and the devotion that this individual had towards his artistry. And he did. The guy was a genius, beyond a shadow of doubt. So many of you may or may not know that it is known universally that Prince had something called a vault in his house. And a vault, right, is something that's like, it's hidden. It could be in the basement, under the house somewhere, or a room that's hidden, away from it. Nobody has access to it. That's why it's called a vault. Eighth house, Sun Vesta, eighth house. That's the vault. That vault contained hundreds and thousands of songs and music that Prince had written that nobody had access to, that had not even been released. Hundreds and thousands. Okay? Vesta conjunct his sun. He was devoted. He used the principle of devotion and dedication towards writing Gemini his music, and he kept it in a vault. Vesta, Sun, and Gemini in the eighth house. Honestly, can you get a more literal example? You can't. That's why this is just like one of my favorite examples. It's so powerful. And there would be a lot more to that Sun Vesta relative to Prince on a private, very, very deep private level, because it's in the eighth house, and he was a very private individual, Sun in the eighth, Scorpio ascendant, Moon in Pisces in the fourth, very private individual and very deep. Okay, so the sister component, which has a dark edge to it, is that Vesta's in the eighth house, and it's in Gemini, which correlates to siblings, and Vesta herself correlates to sisters. So his sister in this lifetime, the connection with them proved to be a connection where she was the dark side of what Vesta can bring up relative to situations to do with siblings, right? And she's trying to take all his money, eighth house. So she's Vesta, sister, in his eighth house. She's trying to take all his money, as far as I understand. She has spoken in ways that are just unfathomable about this beautiful soul who was a genius, who was an incredibly generous soul, who has given more than we will ever know in terms of contributing in humanitarian ways with regards to music schools and all sorts of things. He's donated so much money that no one even knows, right? That's his Sun in the eighth house. He wasn't an egotistical guy. He didn't need to boast and brag about that he was a giver, because he was authentic. He did it from his heart. So his sister, she is here in Gemini, and Gemini has that dark side. It's split. Gemini can be, well, it is actually split. So it identifies very, or rather, it has a real issue with the dark and the light. Gemini gets very caught up in this world of dark light, and it struggles to make sense of that. So Gemini can have an incredibly dark side. She does have a dark side, and even if you see her, she looks sinister, she looks dark, she looks evil, she looks greedy, and it's just terrible what she's done. So there it is. That's his sister, okay, trying to take all his money and trying to basically, make money from him, continue to try and make money from his works, his artistry, while he's not here without his permission, with Paisley Park and the house and tours in there and, all this stuff, right? They're all just trying to milk it for as much as they can, which is what they did with Michael Jackson as well. So anyway, there's a very literal, powerful, clear example of how Vesta can play out from the level of sisters and siblings, and if it comes out in a dark way, there it is. And also from the most beautiful and most powerful way, just the dedication that Prince had towards his music and writing, right? There it is. That was his soul work. That literally was his inner deep soul work. It was so private. It had so much meaning to him. And this is the thing about Vesta, that it's literally, if you think about it, you know, the soul work that you do, if that involves sharing that journey in some way, say for example you're a musician or you're a astrologer, or some other type of artist, where you are engaging in this journey of inner deep soul work, but you are sharing aspects of it, contributing aspects of it to humanity for the purposes of giving giving something back, right? So for example, when I do these videos, I'm giving something really big of myself to you guys when I sit down and do this. This is not a hobby for me. This is my vocation, my love, my passion, and what I dedicate myself to. So my Vesta is conjunct Mars in the 12th house. So this is my spiritual work, and I'm very passionate about it. Mars is right there. She has a lot of other different dimensions to her in my 12th house, which I don't wish to, you know, discuss publicly necessarily. But yeah, this is one example of how I focus her energy in a concentrated way to the exclusion of everything else. Because when I sit down and I give what I give to you guys through my videos, I have shut everything else and everybody out of my life and my world for the time that I dedicate for this. I'm extremely focused. That's Vesta. So have a think about where your Vesta is, and yeah, what you might make sense out of it. It's, again, just remember, she's a deeply complex goddess that has very deep layers to her, that I feel that it takes a long time to really come to some place within your own self and understanding of what is the sacred fire in your heart that she holds, and what have you been doing with that? How have you been working with that? What does that mean for you in your journey of evolution? Beautiful goddess, beautiful energy, deeply mystical, incredibly powerful. Also, just one other thing, because she connects to transforming creative energies, she therefore also correlates to regeneration, right? Because when you're using the sexual energy in a very focused, channeled direction for a very specific purpose, that has a transformative effect on your soul, which creates further illumination, understanding, understanding, psychic development, and so forth. So she has a transformative, regenerative kind of effect about her, if you like. Okay, guys, sending you all much love and blessings. I'll be back with a new moon video very soon because it's coming up. I'll do my best to get it out there as soon as possible. I've just been, you know, working on my own journey. You know, that I haven't been. It's been almost 2 weeks. It's been about almost 2 weeks since I brought a video out for you guys, and I'm just very, very busy with my own personal journey of evolution and soul work, and I'm also very busy working with people charts on a daily basis, rectification, you know, forecast, natal, relationship charts, you name it. So I've got a lot going on, but I'm absolutely dedicated to you guys, to my work, and you know, here it is. This is another offering. So much love and see you soon. Thanks for listening and thanks for subscribing if you're new to my channel. And yeah, much love and blessings to all of you. Thanks, bye.